Interestingly enough, in the 20th century is when that actually stopped happening. First with behaviorism, and then with, to some extent, in what is now called computationalism. So what did behaviorism do? Behaviorism said, because, in fact, they said, I'll take Descartes seriously. Your thoughts are inaccessible to me. Your experiences are inaccessible to me. And therefore, there's simply no point in me talking about them at all. You are a black box as far as I am concerned, so I'll treat you as a black box. Why should I believe that you have any thoughts and feelings and so on? Because anyway, I don't have access to them. Instead, I'll just think of you as an input-output machine. There's a stimulus comes in, stuff happens, you don't know what that is. Output comes out. I'm only going to map the input to the output. That's what behaviorism is about. Right? Behaviorism is an input-output theory of the mind, and the input are stimuli, and the outputs are behaviors. So input could be a flash of light, and output could be some startling reflex. Right? So this is the behaviorist account of the mind. It's the first sort of major account of the mind, which is actually denying the mind entirely. So it's sort of one of those surrogate things. It's a little bit like in court, one of those jokes go like people. There's a man on the dock in a court, and somebody asks him, "So when did you stop beating your wife?" Right? You can't answer that in a yes or no. Or have you stopped beating your wife? Right? If you say no, well then you're in trouble. And if you say yes, it also still means that you were doing it before, right? So behaviorism basically therefore undercut the mind, try to undercut the mind by basically saying either it doesn't exist, in which case obviously we shouldn't study it, or even if it exists, it's inaccessible to me and therefore I shouldn't study it. I should only study stimuli and responses. Okay? And this clash between behaviorism and what's now called computationalism is the beginning point of modern cognitive science. Okay, which is why it's very, very important to understand, because modern cognitive science of the computational kind does not emerge from a reaction to Freud or subjective accounts of the mind, but comes as a reaction to behaviorism. And therefore, unfortunately, it carries many of the methodological assumptions of behaviorism with it. It hasn't fully shared that history. So, what does behaviorism says? Behaviorism says that there is an input, there is an output, but the mapping between the two should not be done through any internal mechanism. If I postulate a mechanical connection between the two, so for example, if I hit a hammer, every doctor showed this to you, right? So you hit a hammer on the knees and your legs will jerk. And that can be explained entirely in physiological terms. So there is an impulse that goes direct. So there is a reflex arc that connects the stimulus and response. And that's physiological. It's not based on any mental account. There's no thinking supposedly going on when you do that reflex. And that's a perfectly fine system as far as behaviorism goes. What happens in the 1950s is people start saying, okay, we will accept your input-output model of the mind. So there's input, there's output. What we will disagree with you is whether the in-between, the black box, should be a black box or it should actually be a white box. That is to say, should it have some mechanisms that should be understood explicitly? And if so, what are those mechanisms? And the standard answer, therefore, is those mechanisms are computational mechanisms. They're not physiological mechanisms. And that's the beginning of the computational study of the mind. It's still an input-output model. It's still saying that, yes, you can model the mind as stimuli of various kinds of inputs and behaviors, let's say, as various kinds of outputs. Just between stimuli and behaviors is a whole mental process that is best understood as a computation. That's the computational theory of mind. And you can see that What is problematic in it is exactly what it takes for granted from behaviorism, that we are actually input-output devices. If we are not input-output devices, it doesn't make sense to call that the middle part of it as a computer. We are just not input-output devices. But if we are input-output devices, you can then disagree on whether we are black boxes or whether we are computers. But how does the black box get filled? And the first place where that was really well studied was in the study of language. So Chomsky in particular, who was trained as a linguist but also knew enough about the emerging disciplines of computer science. Incidentally, many of the things that he discovered as a linguist are now taught in computer science but not taught in linguistics. So the Chomsky hierarchy for languages, and the fact that finite state automata can do certain things. I don't know if JNU linguistics teaches you that, but I'm guessing it doesn't. But it's still standard fare if you're a computer scientist. So what does Chomsky say? He says, let us take a sentence like, John hit the ball, right? So that can be understood as NP, VP, right? John is a noun phrase, hit is a verb phrase. And then within hit, the verb phrase is divided into one verb, right, which is hit, and then there is a determiner, the, and then there is the noun, which is ball, right? So the noun. So you can break down the sentence into its constituent components, and that has a structure to it. Right? English, for example, always has the subject, object, verb, subject, verb, object in that order. John comes first, hit comes second, ball comes third. What Chomsky shows is there is a computational combinatorial structure to this. So instead of John hit the ball, I can also say John from Delhi hit the ball, which would distinguish, let's say, John from Ramesh from Bangalore hit the ball. But then I can say John from Delhi hit the ball very hard. I can say John from Delhi hit the ball perpendicular to the goalpost. I can therefore embed clauses inside each other in such a way that there is no end point. So Chomsky makes a very, very interesting argument, okay, which if you have studied linguistics, you may not even be aware of how interesting that argument is. And it becomes interesting for us only when you start thinking how you would develop a computational common mind. Chomsky says that there is no end to the